My champagne flute slipped from Claire's hand the moment she crumpled onto the flagstone of my backyard patio. Margaret, her mother, lay convulsing beside the fire pit, froth gathering at the corners of her mouth. All I could think was, well, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Before I explain how I arrived at this scene, understand one thing. I have weathered 2 years on this planet, built a business from scratch after my husband passed, and I did not earn a multi-million-dollar exit by being careless. When someone at your retirement celebration eyes your bank balances like a hungry person eyes a buffet, you notice. 2 hours earlier, laughter filled my 2,800-square-foot home. I'd just sold my consulting firm for $23 million. Daniel, my son, insisted on hosting. "Mom, you deserve a proper send-off," he said. "Let Claire coordinate. You just relax." I should have known something was off when Claire volunteered to be hostess. The woman who fretted over laundry had become suddenly obsessed with centerpieces and crystal. The gathering was polished. About 30 guests, former colleagues, neighbors, and family. Claire had hired a bartender and hired a string quartet. "Only the best for you, Eleanor," she said, pressing her manicured hand to my arm. I chatted with an old partner about municipal contracts when I glimpsed her at the drinks table. Claire kept darting glances, then produced a tiny vial from her purse, so small it might be missed by anyone not looking for trouble. My skin chilled. A sane person might have shouted, grabbed the glass, or called someone. I have learned that sometimes the best way to catch a snake is to let it think it's cornered a mouse. So I smiled at my partner and watched. Claire lifted the doctored champagne and walked toward me, her face the perfect mask of concern. "Eleanor, you look tired," she said, offering the flute. "Please, have a toast. You've earned it." I accepted, thanked her, and engaged in polite conversation. When she turned to show a neighbor her new bracelet, I acted. Near us stood Margaret, looking a little lost, clutching her handbag. She reached for a glass without thinking. Quietly, while Claire was occupied, I swapped the flutes. The one I placed beside Margaret contained what Claire had poured. Margaret took a sip and complimented the champagne's refined notes. Within minutes, her words slurred, then her limbs jerked. Claire's scream was immediate and dramatic. She called for someone to dial 911, clutching her own chest with a performance of shock that could fool the inattentive. Almost convincing. The problem with being a murderer, I have found, is that genuine panic and rehearsed panic feel different. Breath patterns, the timing of eye contact, the way hands tremble when fear is real, I saw the mismatch. I knelt by Margaret, testing pulse and airway while others circled. Claire's gaze shifted, not toward her mother's collapsing body, but toward me, and then to the driveway where she must have hoped the ambulance would arrive quickly. People love neat endings. Greed thinks it can arrange them. This is not an accident tale. It's about betrayal and entitlement, about someone who misjudged the woman she targeted. With sirens now approaching down the street, I held Margaret's cooling hand and decided whether to play the bewildered retiree or to let Claire's own unraveling begin. Either way, the truth, like a fine crystal, has a way of shattering when the right hand gives it a little twist. "What happened?" my son, David, demanded as he pushed through the small knot of guests that had formed around us. His face was pale, his voice unsteady, but I noticed something else, an almost imperceptible glance toward Claire, my daughter-in-law, that lasted a fraction of a second too long. "I don't know," Claire sobbed, clutching my arm as though I were her lifeline. "She just collapsed. One moment she was fine, the next..." She gestured helplessly at her mother, Margaret, who now lay unconscious but still breathing on the patio stones. Thank heavens for small mercies. The paramedics arrived in less than 10 minutes, their sirens cutting through the soft evening air of my Scottsdale neighborhood. They knelt beside Margaret, checked her vitals, and quickly lifted her onto a stretcher. I kept my eyes on David the entire time. After 68 years on this earth, and nearly 4 decades of raising him, I knew how to read his moods as easily as I could read the Arizona sky before a storm. Tonight, he looked like a man watching the collapse of a plan he had rehearsed far too many times. "Which hospital?" I asked the lead paramedic. "Valley Memorial," he replied briskly. "Are you family?" "Close friend," I said, casting a meaningful glance at Claire, who was too busy hyperventilating into a tissue to catch the nuance. "I'll follow in my car." David stepped forward quickly. "Mom, you don't need to do that. We'll handle everything. You should stay here, take it easy after the party." How thoughtful. Keep the supposed target at home while they figured out what had gone wrong. "Nonsense," I replied firmly, my keys already in hand. "Margaret is practically family. I'm coming." At the hospital, I made certain to remain close enough to overhear the doctors and nurses as they worked. The words "acute poisoning" floated through the air like smoke from a fire. The physician murmured something to a nurse about plant-based alkaloids, specific enough to tell me someone had done their research on toxins that don't show up easily in a blood panel. Claire paced the waiting room, her expensive heels clicking on the worn linoleum like a metronome of nerves. David sat stiffly in a molded plastic chair, his phone buzzing repeatedly with messages he seemed reluctant to answer. "This is just awful," Claire muttered for the 5th time, wringing her hands. "Poor Mom. I can't understand how this happened." I reached out and patted her shoulder in my best impression of motherly sympathy. "These things are often mysterious, dear. I'm sure the doctors will sort it out." Then I added, almost casually, "You know, it's fortunate she didn't drink much of that champagne. Just a few sips before she collapsed." Claire's stride faltered, so slight most people wouldn't have noticed. "Champagne. You think that's what caused this?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I said, waving dismissively. "Just an old woman's mind searching for patterns." But her face lost a shade of color, and her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee. David's eyes locked onto us with the cold precision of a hawk zeroing in on field mice. 3 hours later, a doctor approached with an update. "She's stable," he said. "We'll keep her overnight for observation." The tests were inconclusive, but whatever she ingested is working its way out. "Can we see her?" Claire asked quickly. "Family only. She's sedated. Best to come back tomorrow." As we left, David walked me to my car. "Mom, maybe you should stay with us tonight," he urged. "After all this, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." How considerate, especially since Margaret's sudden collapse had surely left them both wondering if I suspected anything. The answer, of course, was yes. Absolutely. But there was no need for them to know that yet. "That's sweet of you, dear," I said lightly. "But I'll be fine. I've got that new security system, remember?" I kissed his cheek, got into my car, and watched through the rearview mirror as he and Claire engaged in an urgent, hushed conversation in the glow of the parking lot lights. Back home, I poured myself a proper glass of champagne from a fresh, unopened bottle this time and settled into the leather chair in my study. My house was quiet, the desert night pressing against the windows, but my mind was racing. It was clear now that Margaret had not been the intended victim. The glass with the faint chip had always been mine, and Claire had made sure I received it. Their little plot had misfired, but only just. As I sipped the champagne, I promised myself something. Tomorrow, I would begin finding out exactly what my loving family had planned for me and, more importantly, what I intended to do about it. I spent the night doing something I had perfected during nearly 50 years in the corporate trenches: research. Not the digital kind, with databases and search engines, but the old-fashioned kind, built from memory, instinct, and a suspicious mind. Margaret's collapse at the party hadn't been random, and it certainly hadn't been accidental. No, someone had planned to kill me at my own retirement celebration, most likely hoping it would appear as nothing more than a heart attack or stroke. At 69, those things happen often enough. Who would question a successful woman's heart finally giving out under the pressure of selling her life's work? But why? That was the $23 million question. At 5 a.m., I brewed strong coffee and sat at my oak kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. My neat, practiced handwriting began cataloging every fact I knew about my son David and his wife Claire's financial lives. The picture wasn't pretty. David's architecture practice had been barely scraping by since the downturn in commercial real estate. Claire's boutique design studio, where she claimed to sell custom handbags, was more vanity project than profitable business, yet they lived as if they were flush with cash. Their 2-story home in North Scottsdale carried a mortgage 3 times what their combined income could reasonably cover. The shiny Lexus SUV and Tesla sedan parked in their driveway weren't paid for either. Then there were Claire's spending habits: designer dresses, luxury handbags, private Pilates sessions, the kind of lifestyle that could fund an entire community college's scholarship program. And of course, I had helped them. What mother wouldn't? A few thousand here and there when David confessed money was tight. The down payment on the house, because Claire cried about wanting to start a family in the right neighborhood. Tuition at the private academy for their daughter, Lily, because apparently the public schools weren't up to standard. I flipped through my checkbook registers and old transfer receipts. Over the past 6 years, I had given them nearly $200,000. At the time, I told myself they were gifts, investments in their happiness, never loans. I despised the thought of charging my own child interest. But now, in the quiet dawn of my kitchen, I wondered if they had seen those gifts differently, less like generosity, more like advance installments on an inheritance they couldn't wait to collect. The phone rang at 7:30. Claire's name lit up the screen. "Eleanor, I couldn't sleep all night," she said, her voice weighted with concern. "After what happened to Mom, I keep worrying maybe it was the food or the drinks. You didn't feel sick at all, did you?" How thoughtful of her to check whether her poison had reached its intended target. "Not at all, dear," I replied evenly. "I feel perfectly fine. Have you heard anything more about Margaret?" "Yes. The doctors think she'll be released today. They believe it was something she ate earlier, maybe a clash with her medications. You know how she is." I nearly laughed. Margaret was meticulous with her pills. She organized them into labeled containers, tracked by alarms on her smartphone. Forgetting a dose or mixing them up was not in her nature. "That's a relief," I said gently. "I was afraid it might have been something from the party." "Oh no, definitely not," Claire answered quickly. "The doctors were very clear it wasn't food poisoning. Just one of those things." Interesting. She was in a hurry to shut down any notion that the champagne might be tested, almost as if she feared the wrong bottle might end up in a lab. After I hung up, I walked into the kitchen. The very bottle Claire had opened still sat on my counter, 3/4 full, looking as harmless as any other. I rested my hand on its neck and wondered what a toxicology lab would reveal. Proof wasn't necessary for me. I knew what I had seen. Still, evidence might be useful later. At 9 sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find David on the porch, holding a white box tied with the signature string from my favorite bakery. "Thought you might like some breakfast," he said, kissing my cheek as if nothing were wrong. "I know you probably didn't eat much yesterday after everything." I let him in and set out fresh mugs while he unpacked pastries onto a plate. He moved around my kitchen with the confidence of someone who already considered it his own. And as I poured the coffee, I couldn't help but wonder just how far my son and his wife were willing to go to make that ownership a reality. As Daniel moved easily through my kitchen, opening cupboards he had known since childhood, reaching for the sugar without needing to ask, a wave of sadness washed over me. This was still the boy who once ran through the backyard with dandelions clenched in his tiny fists, the child who proudly taped every stick figure drawing to my refrigerator door. When had that boy become the man who silently stood by while his wife tried to murder me? "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, lowering himself into the chair across from me at the breakfast table. "Oh, you know me," I replied, steadying my voice with effort. "Takes more than a little excitement to rattle these old bones." Daniel smiled, but it stopped short of his eyes. That's what I was afraid of. What a peculiar thing to say. I sipped my coffee and waited. "The thing is," Daniel continued, peeling a piece of pastry from the Danish on his plate, "Claire and I have been talking about your situation." "My situation?" "You're 69 years old, Mom. Living here by yourself, in this big house. And all that money, from selling your company." He gestured vaguely toward the windows, as though the house itself embodied both my solitude and my fortune. "It just seems like a lot for one person to manage." There it was, the setup for their next move. "I appreciate your concern, dear," I said lightly, "but I've been managing quite well so far." Daniel leaned forward, his expression growing serious, almost rehearsed. "Have you, though? I mean, think about yesterday. Margaret collapsed and everyone panicked. What if that had been you? What if you'd gone down and no one found you for hours?" The audacity was breathtaking. They were using their botched murder attempt as justification for why I supposedly needed their protection. "Daniel," I said evenly, "your mother-in-law collapsed at a party with 30 witnesses, and paramedics arrived within minutes. That hardly serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of living alone." "That's not what I meant," he protested, running his hands through his hair. I remembered the same nervous gesture from his teenage years, always a precursor to asking for something he knew I would refuse. "Look," he continued, Claire and I have been doing some research. There are really nice communities for active seniors. You'd have company, activities, even medical staff on site. Ah, yes, the nursing home pitch. How very convenient that they had already been researching my future. How thoughtful, I said, forcing a smile. And did you find something specific in mind? Actually, yes. He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. The screen displayed a glossy website filled with staged photos of silver-haired couples laughing over cards and smiling women waist-deep in a pool. It's called Desert Palms, only 20 minutes from our place. We could visit all the time. It's not really a retirement home, it's more like a resort. Golf course, spa, cultural programs. You'd love it. I studied the pictures. Everyone looked serene, almost too serene, like they had been pacified into cheerful compliance. There's just one catch, Daniel added, lowering his voice. Desert Palms usually has a waiting list, but if someone wants to move in quickly, they need to pay the entrance fee up front. It's around $400,000. But it covers everything: housing, meals, medical care for life. $400,000. A tidy slice of my assets. Once I was tucked away in Desert Palms, who would have access to the remaining $22 million? Who would make all the decisions about my care and my fortune? It sounds lovely, I said smoothly. But you know, I'm happy here. This house holds so many memories of your father. Mom, Daniel replied softly. Dad's been gone for 15 years. Don't you think it's time to start a new chapter? The gentle tone, the look of concern, it might have moved me once. If I hadn't witnessed what I had the night before, I could almost have believed it was real. A son worried for his mother, hoping she would be safe and cared for. It would have been touching. Instead, it was chilling. I'll think about it, I said at last. It's a big decision. Relief spread across his face, almost too quickly. Of course, take all the time you need. Maybe we could drive out there next week, just to look around. Maybe, I murmured, rising from the table. I began clearing the breakfast dishes, my hands steady, though my heart was racing. Behind me, Daniel scrolled absently through his phone, confident that he'd planted the seed. He didn't see the expression on my face. Determined, cold, ready. Because if my son and his wife thought they could push me out of my home and into a gilded cage, they had no idea who they were dealing with. You know, I should call Margaret today, make sure she's feeling better, I said aloud, mostly to myself. Actually, Mom, Daniel replied carefully, Claire asked me to tell you that Margaret probably needs to rest for a few days. The doctor said visitors might be too stimulating while she recovers. How convenient. Keep me away from the victim until the evidence is out of her system and her memories blur. After Daniel left, I sat in my study, a sunlit room filled with shelves of books and the faint scent of old paper. I thought about timing. They had waited until after I sold my company to make their move. Smart. If I had died 6 months earlier, my $23 million would have gone directly to Daniel under the terms of my will. But as a gift from a living parent, the transfer would face a different tax structure. Killing me now, especially if they could fabricate signs of declining mental capacity, would give them grounds to contest any recent changes to my estate plan. The phone rang, startling me. My attorney, Robert Lang, was returning a call I had left the night before. Eleanor, he said warmly. Good to hear from you. How was the retirement party? Eventful, I replied dryly. Robert, I need to see you soon. Is everything all right? I looked out my study window at the desert garden my late husband had planted 20 years ago. Even now the roses bloomed stubbornly, vibrant and orderly, despite having only me to tend them, an old woman who apparently couldn't be trusted to manage her own life. I'm not sure, I said softly, but I think I'm about to find out. Robert Lang had been my attorney for 2 decades. He had walked me through my husband's death, the building of my consulting firm, and every major decision since. A lean, meticulous man who kept his emotions behind a precise professional mask. Robert was exactly the kind of lawyer you wanted when you suspected your family might be trying to kill you. His office perched on the 14th floor of a sleek glass tower in downtown Phoenix, all dark walnut paneling and deep leather chairs meant to inspire confidence. I had always felt safe here, surrounded by law books and the subtle scent of expensive cologne. Tell me everything, Robert said once his secretary had brought coffee and closed the door. I told him everything from the party, Margaret's collapse, the suspicious vial, Daniel's breakfast visit that morning, and Claire's frantic phone call. Robert listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily across a yellow legal pad. "You're certain about what you saw?" he asked when I finished. "As certain as I am that I'm sitting in this chair." He leaned back, tapping the pen against his lips. "The problem is proving intent. Claire could claim she was adding something harmless to the champagne, a supplement, a flavoring, even some kind of essential oil. Without testing the remaining champagne, we have no hard evidence of attempted murder." "Then let's test it," I said firmly. "If we find poison, we'll have proof she tried to kill someone." Robert shook his head. "But we still can't prove she meant to kill you specifically. She could claim she was targeting her own mother for insurance money, or that it was some bizarre prank gone wrong. Even with proof of poisoning, they could wriggle away from a murder charge." I hadn't considered that angle. My stomach tightened. So even with evidence, they could escape. "Attempted murder, yes," he said gravely. "But Eleanor, there's something else we need to discuss." His expression grew even more serious. "If they're willing to kill you for your money, they may also try legal tactics. First, challenges to your competency, for instance. On what grounds? Your age, living alone, the stress of selling your business. If they can establish a pattern of poor judgment or declining mental capacity, they could petition for guardianship. Once they control your person, they control your assets." Suddenly the retirement community suggestion clicked into place. "Isolate me, surround me with medical professionals who might be persuaded to document signs of confusion or dementia, especially if those professionals were well compensated for their observations." "What do I need to do?" I asked quietly. Robert opened a file drawer and withdrew a thick folder. "First, we document your current mental state. I'll arrange for you to be evaluated by a respected geriatric psychiatrist, someone who specializes in competency assessments for older clients. We'll get that on record immediately. And then?" "Then," he said, meeting my eyes squarely, "we build a protective wall around your estate before anyone else can touch it. Powers of attorney, living trusts, emergency alerts, everything. If they're setting a trap for you, Eleanor, we're going to make sure they fall into it themselves." I sipped my coffee, feeling its heat spread through my hands. For the first time since the party, my pulse began to slow. Outside the tall windows, the Arizona sun reflected off the glass towers like a signal fire. Inside, surrounded by legal armor, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since last night. Resolve. "We'll get creative with your estate planning," Robert said with a faint but unmistakable smile. "If Daniel and Claire want to play games with your money, let's make sure they're playing by your rules." For the next 2 hours, we sat in his walnut-paneled office, going over options. We built trust structures that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to challenge my decisions. We drafted medical directives specifying exactly who could and who absolutely could not make healthcare decisions on my behalf. We set up financial arrangements that would trigger automatic audits and freeze accounts if anyone attempted unauthorized access. "There's one more thing," Robert said as I gathered my handbag to leave. "Given what you've told me about last night, you should also consider your personal safety. If they tried once, they may try again more carefully next time." I thought of Daniel's sweet suggestion that I stay at their house after the party. How convenient it would have been for them. A wealthy widow, distraught over a friend's sudden illness, perhaps taking a sedative to help her sleep. How easy it would be for an older woman to accidentally take too many pills. "What do you recommend?" I asked quietly. "Security cameras for starters," Robert replied. "Motion sensors, a panic button system. I know a company that specializes in protection for high-net-worth clients." High-net-worth clients. That's what I was now, apparently, rich enough to kill for. Driving back to my Adobe-style home in Scottsdale, I found myself studying every car in my rearview mirror, wondering if I was being followed. Paranoia, maybe. But as my late husband used to say, "You're not paranoid if they're really after you." My phone rang just as I pulled into my garage. Claire's name flashed on the screen, her voice syrupy sweet when I answered. "Eleanor, I just wanted to let you know Mom's home from the hospital," she said brightly. "She's feeling so much better, though she doesn't remember much about last night. The doctor says that's normal with this kind of incident." How perfectly convenient. "I'm so glad she's all right," I said. "I'd love to visit her tomorrow." "Oh, she's really not up for visitors yet," Claire said quickly. "Maybe in a few days. I'll let you know." "Of course, dear. Just tell her I'm thinking of her. And after hanging up, I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the house I'd called home for 30 years. My husband and I had bought it when Daniel was 10, full of dreams about family dinners and holiday gatherings. The mortgage had been a stretch back then, but we were young and optimistic, sure that everything would work out. Now it felt like a fortress under siege. But I'd been in business long enough to know that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. It was time to show my family what a 69-year-old woman was really capable of. The security company arrived promptly at 8 the next morning, 3 technicians in plain white vans. They spent the day installing cameras, motion detectors, and a panic button system linked directly to local law enforcement. I told the neighbors I'd been having problems with package theft. A believable story in any suburban neighborhood. By late afternoon, my house was more secure than most banks. But the real security arrived at 2 o'clock in the form of a thick envelope delivered by Robert's messenger. Inside were my updated will, trust documents, and medical directives, all properly witnessed and notarized. If Daniel and Claire wanted my money, they'd have to wait for it, and they'd get far less than they expected. The new will cut Daniel's inheritance from everything to a modest trust fund paying him $50,000 a year for life. Enough to live comfortably, but not enough to sustain the champagne and Lexus lifestyle they'd built on my generosity. The bulk of my estate would go to cancer research, with smaller amounts earmarked for several charities I had supported for decades. As for Claire, she got nothing, not a penny. I had tolerated her for Daniel's sake, but attempted murder was where I drew the line. I was reading through the documents one final time, a strange calm settling over me, when my new doorbell camera chimed. The monitor flickered on, and there they were, Daniel and Claire, standing on my front porch, both looking far less polished than usual, their smiles tight, their eyes dark. "Mom," Daniel began when I opened the intercom channel, his voice careful but urgent. "We need to talk." End of chapter. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the button that would unlock the front door. My kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and roses from the garden. The legal documents lay on the table behind me, like a stack of armor. For the first time in days, I felt no fear at all, only clarity. "We need to talk," Daniel said when I opened the front door. "Of course, dear, come in." They settled into my sunlit living room. Claire perched on the edge of the sofa, like a runner poised to bolt, her hands clenching a tissue she'd already shredded. Daniel's eyes drifted around the room, lingering on the small black dome of the new security camera in the corner. "New camera?" he asked casually. "Package theft," I said smoothly. "You can't be too careful these days." Claire cleared her throat. "Eleanor, we've been thinking about what happened the other night with Mom's accident." "Oh, yes? Well, we just feel awful about having the party here. If something we brought caused her to get sick." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I watched this performance with a professional appreciation. Claire had clearly been rehearsing. "I'm sure it wasn't anything you brought, dear," I said gently. "But what if it was?" Daniel leaned forward, his brow furrowed in practiced worry. "What if there was something wrong with the champagne or the food? Mom, I'd never forgive myself if we'd accidentally put you in danger." Here it came, the setup for whatever they'd planned next. "The point is," Claire continued, "we think it might be better if we took care of you for a while, just until we're sure you're safe." "Took care of me? How?" "Well, you could stay with us," Daniel said quickly. "Just temporarily. Until we figure out what happened the other night." I let the silence stretch, studying their faces. Daniel looked genuinely worried. He'd always been good at convincing himself his motivations were pure. Claire looked like a woman whose credit card statement was due tomorrow. "That's very thoughtful," I said at last. "But I'm perfectly safe here." "Are you, though?" Claire's voice had an edge now. "You're 69 years old, Eleanor, living alone. What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" The same argument Daniel had made yesterday. They were working from a script. "What if you have a fall?" Daniel added. "Or a heart attack? Mom, at your age, anything could happen." At my age, as if 69 meant I was already dead and just hadn't noticed yet. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "you're absolutely right. Anything could happen at my age." Their faces brightened, expecting me to surrender. That's exactly why I spent the day updating my will. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Your will?" Claire's voice was carefully neutral. "Oh yes," I said brightly. It's amazing how a brush with mortality, even someone else's, makes you think about these things. I realized my old will was terribly out of date. Daniel's face had gone pale. What kind of updates? I smiled at him, the same smile I'd used when he was 8 years old, and I caught him lying about breaking my favorite vase. Oh, just some minor adjustments to reflect my current priorities. You know how these things go. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear their minds racing, trying to calculate how badly their plans had just been disrupted. Well, Claire said finally, her voice tight, I'm sure whatever you decided was for the best. End of Tam. I think so too, dear. They left shortly after, promising to check on me soon. I watched from my security monitor as they sat in their car in my driveway for 10 minutes, having what looked like a very intense conversation. Then Claire made a phone call. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her gesturing angrily. Daniel kept trying to take the phone away from her, and she kept pushing his hand aside. When they finally drove off, I poured myself a glass of Chardonnay and settled into my favorite armchair. Tomorrow, I would implement phase 2 of my plan. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the first peaceful evening I'd had in days. After all, there is something deeply satisfying about watching your enemies realize they've underestimated you. The game was just beginning, and I had been playing it a lot longer than they had. The next morning brought a visitor I wasn't expecting. Margaret Collins stood on my doorstep, looking pale but resolute, as if she had something important to tell me. Margaret stood on my doorstep, pale but determined, clutching a small purse as though it were a lifeline. Eleanor, I need to talk to you, she said without preamble. It's about the other night. I invited her inside and put the kettle on, watching her carefully for any lingering effects of the poisoning. She looked tired, yes, but far more alert than her daughter would have wanted me to believe. Claire told me I'd had some kind of reaction to medication, Margaret said, as she settled stiffly into one of my armchairs. But Eleanor, I don't take medication. Not a single pill. Just vitamins. I haven't for years. Interesting, I murmured. What do you remember about the party? Everything, she replied firmly, until I started feeling dizzy. I remember the champagne tasting odd, bitter, almost metallic, and I remember seeing Claire near the drinks table earlier, fiddling with a small bottle. My pulse quickened. What kind of bottle? Like an eyedropper, Margaret said, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her teacup. The kind used for essential oils, or something worse? Her gaze met mine, stark with fear. Eleanor, I think my daughter tried to poison you. Oh, why would you think that? Margaret let out a short, bitter laugh. Because she's been talking about your money for months, about how unfair it is that you have so much, while they struggle. She said more than once that life would be easier if something happened to you. The pieces slid into place with an awful certainty. Has she said anything specific? I pressed. Last month, she asked if I thought you'd updated your will. She seemed very concerned about what Daniel might inherit. Margaret leaned closer, her voice dropping. Eleanor, I think they've been planning this for some time. I made a decision. Margaret deserved to know the truth, and I needed an ally who had witnessed their behavior firsthand. Margaret, I said carefully, I saw Claire put something in my champagne glass that night. I switched glasses with you deliberately. The color drained from her face. She tried to kill you, and I almost died instead. Yes, We sat in silence for a long moment, each of us grappling with the magnitude of what had nearly happened. What are you going to do? Margaret asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, I said, just not the way they expect to get it. Her brow furrowed. What does that mean? It means your daughter and my son are about to learn that some games have higher stakes than they realized. After Margaret left, I picked up the phone and called an old contact. Patricia Wallace ran a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate espionage and financial digging. We had worked together years ago whenever I needed background checks on potential business partners. Eleanor Grant, Patricia said warmly when she answered. I heard about your sale. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied. But I need a favor. A personal one. And what kind of favor? I need to know everything about my son's finances, I said firmly. Bank accounts, credit cards, loans, investments, everything. There was a pause on the other end. Eleanor, Are you sure? Information like that can be painful. I'm sure, I said without hesitation. Give me 48 hours. While Patricia worked her magic, I began the next phase of my plan. I called Daniel and asked him to meet me for lunch at our old restaurant, the place where we'd celebrated his graduation, his engagement, and later Lily's birth. He arrived looking nervous, constantly checking his phone. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked. "You sounded upset on the call." "I've been thinking about what you and Claire said," I told him. "About my safety, about planning for the future." His face brightened instantly. "And? I think you're right. It's time to make some changes." Daniel leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of changes?" "Well, I've been looking into Desert Palms, the community you mentioned. I even called them this morning." His eyes lit up. "That's wonderful, Mom. I think you'll really like it there. They did say one unit just opened up, but there's already someone else interested. If you want it, you'll need to move quickly." "How quickly?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Next week," he said, smiling a little too broadly. "1 week," Daniel said eagerly. "You'd need to pay the entrance fee by Friday to secure the spot at Desert Palms." His excitement was palpable, like a child on Christmas morning. "That's not a problem, is it? You have the funds from the sale." "Of course I do," I replied smoothly. "It's just, well, it's a big step. I thought maybe you and Claire could help me with the paperwork. Make sure I'm making the right decision." "And absolutely," Daniel said quickly. "We'd be happy to help." I smiled at my son, memorizing his face. In just a few days, that eager expression would twist into something far less pleasant. "There's just one thing," I added casually. "The facility requires all residents to have a power of attorney on file, someone to make decisions if they can't. I was hoping you'd be willing to take that on." "Of course, Mom, whatever you need." "Perfect." Daniel thought he was maneuvering me into handing him control over my fortune. Instead, he was walking directly into my trap. Patricia called Thursday morning with her report. I listened in growing disbelief as she detailed Daniel and Claire's financial situation. "They're leveraged to the hilt," Patricia said. "The house has been refinanced 3 times. They've got 2 mortgages plus a maxed-out home equity line. Credit card debt exceeds $80,000. How have they been keeping up with payments?" I asked. "Barely. Daniel's firm has been operating at a loss for nearly 2 years. They're using credit cards to pay other credit cards. Classic financial desperation." "Anything else?" "Yes. Claire took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago. $500,000 with her listed as the beneficiary." My blood turned to ice. "How is that even legal?" "She claimed insurable interest as your daughter-in-law and supposed caregiver. The company likely assumed Daniel was the true beneficiary and Claire just handled the paperwork." A life insurance policy. They hadn't just improvised this plan, they'd been plotting my death for months. "There's one more thing," Patricia added. "Daniel's been making regular payments to someone named Dr. Richard Caldwell, a geriatric psychiatrist. Small consultation fees, starting 3 months ago. I made a note to ask Robert about him." That afternoon, Daniel and Claire arrived at my house carrying a sleek briefcase stuffed with paperwork for Desert Palms. They spread the documents across my dining table like military officers preparing for battle. "This is the admission contract," Claire explained, pointing to a thick stack of papers. "And here's the financial disclosure form. It lists all your assets so they can calculate your monthly fees." "It's very thorough," I observed, scanning the forms. They wanted access to every account, every investment, every penny. "And this," Daniel added, sliding another document toward me, "is the power of attorney. Pretty standard. It just gives me authority to handle your financial affairs if you can't." I picked up the document and read it carefully. It was far more comprehensive than Daniel had suggested. With one signature, he'd gain immediate access to my bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the authority to make nearly any financial decision in my name. "This seems quite broad," I said calmly. "Do I really need to give you this much authority?" "Mom, it's just a precaution," Daniel said quickly. "The facility requires it. And honestly, at your age, it's safer to have someone younger handle complicated financial matters." There it was again, at your age. "What if I change my mind about Desert Palms?" I asked, setting the paper down. "Can this be revoked?" Daniel and Claire exchanged a quick, nervous glance. Well, technically, yes, Claire admitted, but the facility has strict policies about residents who try to leave. There are medical evaluations, waiting periods. It's complicated. Of course it was. Once I signed those papers and moved into Desert Palms, Daniel and Claire would control my money. With that power of attorney in their hands, they could make it nearly impossible for me to leave, especially if Dr. Richard Caldwell was waiting in the wings to evaluate my mental competency. I need to think about this overnight, I said, carefully gathering the documents into a neat stack. It's a big decision. Daniel's face fell, though he tried to hide his disappointment. Mom, remember, they need everything submitted by tomorrow if you want that unit. I understand, I said calmly. I'll have an answer for you in the morning. After they left, I wasted no time. I called Robert Lang. Robert, I asked as soon as he picked up, what can you tell me about a doctor? Richard Caldwell? Caldwell? Robert repeated. He's a geriatric psychiatrist, specializes in competency evaluations for older patients. Why? My son has been paying him for consultations, I said. There was a long pause. Eleanor, Caldwell has a reputation for being accommodating. Families who are eager to take control of an elderly relative's assets often bring him in. His reports tend to support whatever outcome the family is hoping for. And? You mean? I said coldly. He'll declare someone incompetent for money. I couldn't say that officially, Robert replied carefully. But I've seen cases where his evaluations gave relatives exactly what they needed to seize control. The picture snapped into focus with brutal clarity. Daniel and Claire weren't just after my money. They'd built a comprehensive strategy. Step 1, persuade me to enter Desert Palms under the guise of safety. Step 2, gain full access to my accounts through power of attorney. Step 3, if I resisted, have Dr. Caldwell declare me unfit to manage my own affairs. It was clever, chillingly clever. If I hadn't seen Claire poison the champagne, I might have walked right into their trap. Robert, I said, my voice steady, I need you to prepare something for me, and I need it ready by tomorrow morning. What kind of something? The kind that will teach my family a lesson they'll never forget. Howitzer. That evening, I sat in my study, the glow of the desk lamp reflecting off the glass of wine in my hand. I went over my plan again and again. Everything had to be precise. Tomorrow, Daniel and Claire would get exactly what they thought they wanted, but on my terms. Before bed, I made one final phone call. Friday morning dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that wraps everything in a shroud of unease, perfect for what I had in mind. Daniel and Claire arrived at 9 sharp. Both were dressed like they were heading to a board meeting, which in a way, they were. Have you decided, Mom? Daniel asked, barely containing his excitement as he sat forward on the couch. I have, I said, producing the stack of Desert Palms paperwork. It was signed, notarized, everything in order. I think you're right. It's time for me to begin this new chapter. Claire's relief was immediate. Oh, Eleanor, I'm so glad. You're going to love it there. I'm sure I will, I replied. And Daniel, I've also signed the power of attorney papers. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the documents. This is the right decision, Mom. You won't regret it. I'm sure I won't, I said, smiling faintly. We spent the next hour reviewing financial details. Claire had her laptop open, typing furiously as I recited account numbers and access codes. Every so often, she glanced at Daniel with the giddy disbelief of someone who couldn't believe her luck. There's just one more thing, I said when the paperwork was finished. I need to sign some additional documents with my attorney before the transfer is official. Something about tax implications on large transactions. Of course, Daniel said quickly. Do you want us to drive you to his office? Actually, he's coming here, I replied. Robert should be arriving any moment. Right on cue, the doorbell rang, but when I opened the door, it wasn't Robert standing there. It was Detective Lisa Monroe from the Scottsdale Police Department, along with a colleague I didn't recognize. Mrs. Grant, she said, flashing her badge, we need to speak with you about an incident that occurred at your home earlier this week. Daniel shot to his feet instantly. What kind of incident? A suspected poisoning, Detective Monroe said evenly, her eyes flicking between Daniel and Claire. We understand there was a medical emergency here during a gathering. We'll need to ask you some questions. The living room fell silent. Daniel's face drained of color. Claire clutched her handbag like it might save her, and I sat back in my chair, calm and composed, knowing that the trap had finally closed. Claire's face drained of color. "That was my mother," she stammered. "She just had a reaction to her medication. The doctor said it wasn't serious." "Actually, Mrs. Grant," Detective Monroe replied, her voice calm but firm, "that's not what the hospital reported." She pulled a slim notebook from her coat pocket. "The toxicology results showed your mother ingested a concentrated amount of oleander extract. That is not a medication, it's a lethal poison." The silence in my living room was absolute. "We also had the remaining champagne from that evening tested," Detective Monroe continued. "The bottle that was opened for the party contained the same extract. Someone deliberately poisoned that champagne." Daniel turned toward his wife with dawning horror. "Claire, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything." Claire's voice cracked into a shrill pitch. "This is insane. Why would I poison my own mother?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Detective Monroe said, her eyes sharp. "Especially since the glass with the highest concentration was originally placed in front of Mrs. Grant." Claire swayed, clutching her handbag as if it could steady her. Daniel sagged back into his chair, his face ashen. "There's something else," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the tension. "Detective, show them the insurance policy." Detective Monroe nodded, producing a crisp document from her folder. "Mrs. Carter, we discovered you took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Mrs. Grant 6 months ago. You listed yourself as the beneficiary. That gives you a very clear financial motive." "This is ridiculous," Claire whispered hoarsely. "Eleanor, please tell them this is crazy." I looked directly at her, the woman who had pretended to care about me while plotting my death. "I saw you put the poison in my champagne glass, Claire. I switched our drinks deliberately." Daniel's head jerked up. You knew she was trying to poison you?" "I've known for days," I said evenly. "I also know about your debts, about Dr. Caldwell, and about your plan to have me declared incompetent. I know everything." The power of attorney papers slid from Daniel's numb hands, scattering across the rug. "Mom," he whispered, "I swear, I didn't know she was going to. I didn't know she'd try to kill you. But you knew about the rest of it, didn't you?" My voice was sharper now. "The retirement home, the power of attorney, the plan to take my money." Daniel's silence was answer enough. Detective Monroe stepped forward. "Claire Carter, you are under arrest for attempted murder." As the cuffs snapped around her wrists, Claire turned back to me, her eyes blazing. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You have no idea what you've just done." "Actually," I said, standing straighter, "I know exactly what I've done." When the officers left with Claire in tow, the house felt eerily still. Daniel sat hunched on the couch, staring at the papers strewn across the floor. He dragged a hand down his face, his expression hollow. "She told me it was just about keeping you safe," he said finally. "She said you were becoming forgetful, making bad choices. She convinced me you needed protection. And the money, she said that was part of the protection too." His voice cracked. "We're drowning in debt, Mom. The firm is failing. We're months behind on everything. Claire said, if something happened to you naturally, we'd inherit enough to start over. But she never said anything about," he trailed off, gesturing helplessly, "about murder. I thought we were just planning for the inevitable, for when you passed away on your own." How convenient, I thought bitterly, that those natural causes had needed a little help arriving. Daniel looked up at me, tears brimming. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you." I studied my son's face, searching for truth beneath the remorse. Part of me longed to believe him, to think that Claire had manipulated him into this darkness. But after decades in business, I'd learned not to ignore red flags, especially when they were this bright. "Daniel," I said slowly, "show me your phone." "What?" "Your phone. Hand it to me." He hesitated, his hand frozen halfway to his pocket. "Your text messages with Claire," I clarified. "From the past week. Show me." "I am." After a long pause, Daniel pulled out his phone and handed it over with visible reluctance. I scrolled through the messages, my heart sinking with each line that appeared on the glowing screen. My heart sank with each exchange I read on Daniel's phone. "Claire, did you talk to Mom about Desert Palms?" "Daniel, yes, she's considering it." "Claire, good. The sooner we get her moved, the better." She's been asking too many questions about our finances. End of quote. Daniel, what if she changes her mind? Claire, she won't. Not after tomorrow night. Daniel, what's tomorrow night? Claire, trust me. By Sunday she'll be begging us to take care of her. I handed the phone back to my son. You knew, didn't you? Maybe not the specific method, but you knew Claire was planning something for the night of the party. Daniel's shoulders sagged, his eyes dropping to the floor. I thought she meant to scare you somehow. Stage a break-in, maybe, or some kind of accident that would make you realize you weren't safe living alone. You thought she was going to stage my attempted murder? Not murder, he muttered. Just something that would convince you to move to Desert Palms willingly. The casual way he said it chilled me to the bone. My own son had been comfortable with the idea of traumatizing me into compliance. Daniel, there's something else you need to know, I said evenly. I had a private investigator look into your finances. His face went white. What did you find? Everything. The debt, the failed business, the fact that you've been living beyond your means for years. I reached into my desk and pulled out Patricia Wallace's report, though one section had caught my special attention. The payments to Dr. Caldwell. Mom, I can explain. Can you? I asked, my voice sharp. Because, according to this, you've been paying him to consult on my case for 3 months before you ever mentioned Desert Palms, before you expressed any public concern about my mental state. What exactly were you consulting him about, Daniel? He buried his face in his hands. Claire said we needed a backup plan in case you refused to sign the power of attorney willingly. A backup plan, I repeated coldly. Dr. Caldwell agreed to evaluate you, Daniel whispered. He'd find signs of dementia or incompetence. Claire said it was just a precaution, in case you became difficult. I felt something icy settle in my chest. You were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent from the beginning. Only if necessary, he said quickly. Only if you refuse to let us help you. Help me what, Daniel? My voice cracked like a whip. Help me give you my money? The truth hung heavy between us. My son, the boy I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for, had been plotting to destroy my independence and steal my life's work. There's one more thing, I said quietly. The papers you signed today, the power of attorney I gave you. Daniel looked up hopefully. Yes? They're fake. Robert prepared them specially for this meeting. They give you power of attorney over a bank account containing exactly $1. Daniel stared at me, speechless. What? My real money is safely protected in trusts you can't touch. The will you're so worried about? It leaves you a modest annual income, and nothing more. And if you're convicted of conspiracy or connected to Claire's murder plot, even that disappears. Daniel's face crumpled. You've destroyed my life. No, Daniel, I said softly. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine in the process. As I watched my son sit there in ruins, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just a deep, bone-weary sadness for the man he had chosen to become. 3 months later, I sat in my garden, watching the roses bloom, thinking about endings and beginnings. Claire had been sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder. Daniel received 3 years for conspiracy. His lawyer had managed to argue the charges down. Lily, my granddaughter, had called the night before. At 16, she was old enough to understand what her parents had done, old enough to be horrified by their choices. Grandma Eleanor, I'm so sorry, she said, her voice thick with tears. I had no idea they were planning any of this. I know, sweetheart, I told her gently. None of this is your fault. The roses shifted softly in the wind. My life's work was still mine. My freedom was still mine. And though my heart ached for my son, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I had survived. Grandma, can I come visit you this summer? I know Mom and Dad are away, but I'd love to see you. I'd love that, Lily, I told her, and I meant it. She was innocent in all of this, as much a victim of her parents' greed as I was. In the months since the trial, Margaret Collins had become an unexpected friend. We met for coffee twice a week, 2 women bound by the bizarre experience of surviving betrayal at the hands of our own families. You know, Margaret said during our last coffee date, stirring her cappuccino, I keep thinking about how close they came to getting away with it. They never had a chance, I replied firmly. I've been dealing with people who wanted my money for over 40 years. The only difference this time was that they shared my DNA. Margaret laughed, though there was a bitter edge to it. Do you ever regret how it ended? Both of them in prison? I let the question hang in the air before answering. Did I regret it? Daniel was my son, the child I had raised and loved. But he had also been a man willing to dismantle my life for money. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally, but I don't regret protecting myself. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts later that afternoon while I sat in my garden. Through the security monitor, I saw Robert Lang standing on my porch, briefcase in hand, and an unusually satisfied look on his face. "Robert, what brings you by?" I asked as I welcomed him in. "Good news," he said, settling into my living room armchair. "First, the insurance company has decided not to contest Claire's policy on your life. Since she was convicted of attempting to murder you, they're voiding the policy and refunding all the premiums. That's something, I suppose. There's more. Daniel's creditors are seizing everything to cover his debts. That includes the house you helped them buy. They want to know if you'd like to make an offer." I pictured the grand house with its marble counters, cathedral ceilings, and perfectly manicured lawn, all the luxuries they had craved so desperately. "No," I said quietly. "Let someone else have it. Someone who can afford it honestly." Robert nodded approvingly before pulling out another document. "And the final item, your trust restructuring is complete. Your assets are now protected in perpetuity. No one can access them without your explicit written consent. And if anyone ever tries to have you declared incompetent, the trust automatically transfers to charity." Relief swept through me. "Thank you, Robert, for everything." After he left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my deck, watching the Arizona sunset wash the sky in shades of gold and rose. At 69, I had learned that money brings out both the best and worst in people. Unfortunately, it had brought out the very worst in my own family. But I had also discovered something I'd never fully given myself credit for. I was stronger than I knew, strong enough to see through their lies, tough enough to stop them, resilient enough to begin again without them. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Lily. "Grandma, I got accepted to Northwestern's pre-law program, just like you suggested. I can't wait to tell you all about it when I visit." I smiled as I typed back. "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." And maybe that was the real victory. Not just stopping Daniel and Claire's scheme, but ensuring the next generation had the chance to choose better. Lily would grow up knowing money was a tool, not a goal. That family meant love and support, not exploitation and greed. The roses in my garden swayed gently in the evening breeze, tended now by a landscaping service I could easily afford. My home felt safe, shielded by cameras and reinforced locks, and secured by legal structures that guaranteed my independence. I had started this story with a failed poisoning at what was supposed to be my retirement celebration. But looking back, it wasn't about that at all. It was about something larger, the difference between being old and being powerless. I might be 69, but I was far from powerless. And anyone foolish enough to test that theory would discover, just as Daniel and Claire had, that underestimating an older woman is a very costly mistake. Sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting, it's living well. It's building a life where those who betrayed you don't get to enjoy the fruits of their schemes. I had done both. And that night, as I settled into bed, I felt peace. At my age, a good night's sleep is worth more than all the money in the world. The fact that I had both was simply a bonus. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and please share your own story in the comments. Your voice matters. Life teaches us that trust is precious and sometimes dangerous. Eleanor's story reminds us that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It can come from the people closest to us. That's why it's important to balance love with wisdom. In today's world, financial abuse of seniors is sadly common. Protect yourself by keeping your finances transparent only with people you truly trust, and always consult a qualified professional before signing away authority. Update your legal documents regularly, your will, trusts, and medical directives to ensure your wishes are honored. But protection isn't just legal, it's also emotional. Don't ignore red flags because you want to believe the best in someone. Pay attention to patterns of behavior, and remember, love should never require blind trust or sacrifice of independence. Most importantly, never underestimate your own strength. Age does not mean weakness. Eleanor's victory was not just surviving. It was reclaiming her power and building a life on her own terms. That's advice we can all apply. Guard your independence, trust your instincts, and know that living well is the best form of justice.